So some logistics, this shouldn't be new, but just to review, because this is a webinar format, it's going to be easier for y'all to watch me demo an exercise first before you do it yourselves. So watch me, and then I'll let you know when it's your turn to go ahead and do the exercise. And so I'll be providing you time for that, and there will be step-by-step instructions on the slides, or I will post something on the sharing my screen to show you exactly what you need to do. There may be times, again, when I prompt you to raise your virtual hand, just as you've done the last few days. If you can't do that or don't know how to do that, please let us know. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or go ahead and ask us your questions in the chat. Okay, so what are we doing today? Today, you're going to learn how to write a basic WDL workflow syntax. You'll learn how to specify workflow inputs and outputs, and then upload a workflow to the Broad Methods repository. From there, you'll learn how to export that workflow to your own Terra workspace, and then set up and run the workflow in that Terra workspace. And then we'll have a bunch of resources for you at the end today about WDL workflow development and basics. Okay, so let's start off by reviewing some basic concepts about WDL and the different components that are needed to run a WDL workflow. So what even is a workflow? Well, we talked a little bit about workflows on Monday, but so a workflow is a set of instructions that are connecting multiple analysis steps, allowing you to automate your data processing, right? So when you think about transforming any transformation that your data needs to go through to get from raw input to publication, workflows are good for the steps that you need to apply to all of your data, right? So in Terra, these workflow scripts are written in the workflow description language, or WDL, which is pronounced WDL. WDL is a human readable and writable language, which makes it relatively easy to use. So there are 4 things you need to successfully run a WDL workflow in Terra. The first thing you need is a Docker, which we talked about quite a bit yesterday, right? So it's a portable package of software and all of its dependencies. You need the workflow written in WDL. You need an execution engine for running the WDL. On Terra, we use Cromwell, but there are other execution engines as well. Mini WDL is an example, but we'll focus on Cromwell for today because that's what's used in Terra. And then, of course, you'll need your input data. Excuse me. So let's quickly do a brief refresher on Docker, just in case there's anyone who wasn't here yesterday. So Dockers are a portable package of software and all of its dependencies, right? So you can find Dockers on public repositories and then use them in your workflow scripts. Yesterday, we used Docker Hub, right? But you can also find Dockers on Quay, Google Cloud Registry, as well as other repositories. Now you can use a Docker in essentially 2 ways. You can use them interactively, like we did yesterday, where we ran containers from the command line and built images. But you can also use them in a WDL workflow by specifying them in the WDL runtime section, which we're showing here, and we'll talk about that later today. Yesterday, we gave you instructions for how to build a Docker image, but I wanted to point out that the Terra knowledge base has some additional instructions and tutorials on how to build Dockers that you can check out if you want more information on that. Okay, so that's Dockers. Let's talk about workflows. Yesterday, in our Docker tutorial, we talked about how you want to think about your analysis in discrete steps, right? Where each step pulls in a piece of software or a couple of pieces of software. And that's because we're going to write each of those discrete steps into what we call WDL tasks. And this is an example of a WDL task here called task A. So this task has a couple of defined sections. You can see that it has an input section where we define different input types and assign them to a variable. It has a command section here where we actually tell the workflow to run specific commands that are available in the Docker that you're using. So for example, if you're using a Docker that has bash, you can run bash commands from there. This is going to be the section that is going to do the actual heavy lifting of transforming your data and creating outputs. Okay, a task also has a runtime section, like I just mentioned, where you can specify computational parameters, like the Docker that you want to use. You can specify disk, you can specify CPUs. If you don't specify here, it's going to use the Cromwell defaults, and we have links to those defaults in our resources section at the end of this slide deck if you're interested in that. And then lastly, it has an output section where we write our transformed data to an output variable. If we don't specify outputs here, any outputs from your commands will essentially be removed once you exit the container you're using for the task. So you want to make sure if you want to keep an output, you want to make sure that that output is listed in the output section of the task. So this is one task, and if you think about analyzing data, you probably need to do multiple steps to get from raw data to publication quality data, right? So you may need to have multiple tasks to complete your full analysis. And to string those together, we use a workflow definition. And this is an example of that here. Again, we have several sections. So there are some parts that look similar to a task, right? So we have an input section where we can declare user-defined inputs. We declare the type and then assign them to a variable, right? So these are the inputs that you'll actually be able to modify in Terra and also locally with what we call a JSON file. So these are the user-defined inputs, and you can feed these inputs into the tasks that you call. The next sections here are some call sections that are calling different tasks. So we're calling task A and we're calling task B. When you call task A, you can see that the input to task A, the ref variable, is being assigned to the workflow input myref, right? And then, oops, sorry about that. And then in task B, you can see that we're actually taking the output from task A here by specifying the name of the task, task_A, followed by a period, and then the name of the task A output, which is out. You can see that's the name of that output variable in the task here. So we can also declare workflow outputs as well, and you'll see an example of that today, although we're not showing an example of that here. But what I want you to take from this is that you can call tasks, you can take the output from tasks and feed them into other tasks, allowing you to string together different steps of an analysis to create a full analysis or full pipeline. The other thing that I want to call out here is that tasks can actually be written in the same WDL script as a workflow definition, like we're showing here. So we have our workflow definition, and then our tasks are defined right underneath. You can do it this way, or the tasks can actually be written in their own separate WDL file and then imported into your workflow WDL file. So there's some modularity there in terms of how you can use and reuse tasks. And this will make more sense once we get into actually writing the WDL scripts. But are there any questions so far about these things?
Hi, sorry. Could you clarify a little bit more the input for the workflows, the myref, the my input? Is that being described? Is that being inherited from somewhere else, or that's being created?
Sure. In this input section of your workflow, you're creating those variables here. So these inputs are being created, and then you can pass those inputs to your tasks like this, right? So in my task A, I have 3 inputs that I need. You don't see 3 inputs here, but I have an input called ref. So when I call task A in my workflow, I need to give the task a value for ref. And the workflow variable that goes along with that is my underscore ref. I declared that up here. So I'm saying I want my workflow variable to be the value that I pass for the workflow variable to be used for this input in my task. Does that make sense?
Yes. So this is kind of like thinking backwards in a way. It seems like you define things before they're going to be used. Maybe that's not.
Yeah, it all depends, I'd say, on the way that you go about writing your WDL, but generally it makes sense to try to write your tasks and what you do for your tasks first, and then to take those tasks and string them together in a workflow. So if I know that I have a ref input for my task, when I call it in my workflow, I know I need to have a workflow input that I can pass to that task.
Right. Okay, I see. So these inputs go down to the calling tasks. So the workflow uses predefined tasks. But in this example, I see at the closing curly brace for the workflow task, and then task A and task B proceeding instead of preceding.
Yeah, so it actually doesn't matter if you so you can write the tasks below, and it's not running through your script in the way that you would necessarily read a script. So your tasks can be defined below the workflow, but still called within a workflow above it.
Okay, cool. So just making sense of the slide, task A is something that would appear in the what's on the right-hand side column. It's just exploded out on the left-hand side of the slide.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
And tasks can precede the workflow call.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure.
And for the MyRef, how does it actually resolve that to the file location?
So we will talk about that.
Okay. So what's written there is like it's just a variable.
Yes,
exactly. Like, we could write that actual text that's written there. We wouldn't put a file location in these files.
Correct. You could if you wanted to hard code a file location, but oftentimes for flexibility, you don't want to do that. And we'll talk more about that as we write our own script.
Cool. Yeah. And I guess in Terra you define it. You define it in Terra, I guess, right?
Exactly. Okay, great. These are great questions. Thank you, guys. Okay, continuing on here. So when you run a WDL workflow, you need to, and this gets at the answer to your question, Eric, you need to specify inputs, right, like strings and file paths using a configuration file called a JSON file. In Terra can actually read WDL workflows and generate a JSON file for you in the user interface. So we're talking about how to set that up today. But you'll also see today how we can create a JSON file locally using LOM tool. As a reminder, there are 2 ways you can bring workflows into Terra. One is DocStore, a GA4GH compliant open source platform for Docker-based tools. It's also the recommended way of doing this because DocStore integrates with your GitHub account, and David will be teaching all about that tomorrow. But today, we're going to be using the second option, the Broad Methods repository, which is a repository that lets you browse and search public workflows in the Terra community. This is going to allow us to write a WDL on the fly and import it without needing to worry about permissions or setting up GitHub or anything. But again, we'll talk more about that tomorrow. We just wanted to show you kind of both ways to do it. Okay, so let's actually dive into writing a WDL and running it in Terra. The first thing we'll need to do is clone the WDL puzzles workspace. And I'm going to post a link to this in the chat. There's the WDL puzzles workspace that we're going to use today. So we need to clone this workspace. And I'm going to, we did this on Monday, but I'm going to demo it really quick again for you and have you do it yourselves after. I already have the workspace open here. So watch my screen for now. I'll demo this quickly, and then I'll ask you to do it once I'm done. Okay, so this is the workspace that we're going to be using today. This workspace, this WDL puzzles workspace, has exercises in it that will let you solve puzzles using WDL to practice using the language. We're not going to be using the puzzles today, but feel free to go in there and try it out after the workshop, play around with those, see if you can come up with the answers, just to get more comfortable with WDL. Okay, so to make a clone of this workspace, what I need to do is click on this vertical 3-dot icon on the top right, and then click clone. In this box that pops up, remember, I need to give my workspace a unique name. It can't be the same name as anyone else's in this workshop. So I'm going to delete copy, and then I'm going to say KM for my initials, and then today is 2023-05-25, so that's today's date. Now I need to choose my billing project. Remember, the billing project we're using for this workshop is 2305 WDL Bootcamp. I'll select that, come down and click Clone Workspace. Okay, and again, you'll know when your workspace is done being cloned because Terra will take you to the dashboard of that workspace. Okay, actually, not yet. So keep following along with me. I want to do a couple of more steps before I ask you to go ahead and do this yourselves. So keep watching my screen. Once you're in your copy of the workspace, you want to navigate to the Broad Methods repository, which is where we're going to be doing our coding today, as I mentioned. You can access this directly with a link, or you can do this from any workspace in Terra that you have at least read access to. I'm going to show you how to access it from Workspace, because that's, I think, kind of the easiest way for me. So, and if you're already in Workspace, it's the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to click on Workflows, and then find a workflow. And then in this box that pops up, I'm going to click Broad Methods repository down at the bottom here. Okay. I'm already signed in, so I don't need to do that. You may need to sign in when you first come to the Broad Methods repo. It can be a little funky with signing in, so you may have to sign in and then refresh to make sure that it's working okay, or it may ask you to sign in more than once. It's a little funky, but it's a good place to do this coding on the fly, so stick with me. A couple more things here before I ask you to do these steps yourself. I want to create a new method here, so I'm going to click on that. And when I do that, this window pops up. In this window, for creating a new method, I have to enter a couple things. I have to enter a namespace, first of all. This namespace is like a folder to hold your methods in, and it needs to be unique across the entire methods repo. So if I named my namespace Kaylee, someone else can't name theirs Kaylee throughout the entire Broad Methods repo. I'm going to use my GitHub handle, which is Kaylee Mathews. So that's going to be my namespace, and again, that's going to hold all of my methods in it. Okay, and now I want to give my workflow a name here. The workflow today is a simple, the first one we're going to write is a simple hello world workflow that takes in an input, a name as input. And so I'm going to call this hello input, and then I'm going to add the date at the end. So that's what I'm going to name my workflow. Okay, now once you get to this point, just hang out on this page because I'm going to walk you through the actual syntax and writing your tasks in your workflow at that point. So with that, take a few minutes, go through these steps, clone the workspace, open the Methods repo, and create a new method, add that namespace, add a workflow name, and then raise your virtual hand for me once you're done with those things. And please feel free to speak up if you have questions, if you need to see something again, type in the chat, let us know how we can help.
What are the credentials that we use for the Road Methods repository? Is that linked to the Terra account?
I believe so. Liz, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, your Terra login should work on that. It's part of Terra. It might prompt you to re-login, but it is your Terra credentials.
Okay, cool.
I don't think I've had to log in since the first time I went to it, so I forgot. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
And Liz, thanks for answering all those questions in the chat. Okay, I believe I got lost. Where did we lose you? I might as well just, are you able to clone your workspace? You can clone your workspace after creating the name for the, if you have already created the name for your workflow, then you're all set. That's all you need to do at this point. And then raise your virtual hand and we'll move on together. For cloning the workspace, does the bucket location matter? The bucket location matters for cost reasons, but you should keep what's the default to make it easy on yourself. And if you aren't doing the exercises with us today, and just kind of watching, that's totally okay. But if you wouldn't mind also raising your hand just to let me know that we don't need to wait on you. Lydia asked in the chat, is WDL used just on Terra or is it used in other contexts? It is absolutely used in other contexts. There is a great community of WDL users. We'll talk a little bit more at the end of the session today about how you can get in touch with WDL users outside of just those who use it in Terra. What is a question in the chat? What is the name you're giving the workflow? I called mine hello input followed by today's date, but this is a name for you, so you could name it anything you wanted, really. In the chat, when I log in on firecloud.org, I get a second login screen, but when I log in there, I just get sent back to that same second login screen. It can be a little funky with logging in. I would suggest refreshing the page and trying again. Sometimes you do have to go through a couple rounds of logging into it.
So if you're going directly to firecloud.org and not going to the methods page, you will get relogged back into Terra because Firecloud and Terra are now the same thing. But if you go to that methods page and log in from there, that should work. Is that not working?
Let's see.
I put the link to the direct link to the methods page in the chat.
Let us know if that doesn't solve it for you. That's not solving it either. Maybe try going back to the workspace and then navigating back to the Road Methods repo through there.
I'm also happy to jump into a breakout room if that would be helpful for troubleshooting.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. So
Okay.
let's try and do that. Liz, I gave you co-host permission, so you should be able to, I think.
Yeah, I'll create a breakout room and let's see. I'm going to assign manually so that I can grab. Okay, right.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Yep.
Okay, Eric asked in the chat, do text editors have syntax highlighting for WDL? If so, which ones? I don't know of any that have WDL syntax highlighting by default, but I believe there is a small package you can download for Sublime that will highlight WDL. Actually, I know that there's a package you can download for Sublime because that's what I use personally. Although I did it so long ago, I don't remember exactly what it's called. But if you Google Sublime WDL toolkit, David, thank you. That is exactly it. So you can use that.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, how's everybody else doing? Any other issues we're running into? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on now. So anyone who has your hands up, you can go ahead and put your hands down. If you weren't able to make it to this step, please, if you're having trouble, please let us know because we want to make sure that you're able to do these hands-on exercises and get the most you can out of the workshop today. So if I need to slow down, please do let me know. Okay, let's actually dive into our Hello World script here. So I'm going to come back to my methods repo, and I'm going to actually start writing a WDL. To bring a WDL in here, there are two ways you can do it. You can actually load a WDL from a file if you wanted by clicking this, or you can type directly in this text box. Today, we're just going to type it in directly. Again, I'm going to demo this first, so please just watch for this part, and I'll give you time afterwards to go ahead and write out this yourselves. Okay, the first thing we want to do is declare the version of WDL that we're using. So we're using version 1.0. That's because Cromwell uses version 1.0 of the WDL spec. If you don't specify a version here, you're probably going to run into problems in Terra, so make sure you do that. Okay, so now when we approach our WDL, the next thing we want to think about are those tasks or those discrete steps in your analysis. The example WDL we want to write today is a hello world WDL that takes in a user-defined name as a string and writes a message that says hello person's name to an output text file. That's going to be the goal of the example today. So again, we're going to approach this by thinking about the task first. So the first thing we'll do is actually define a task section. I'll start by first writing the word task, and then I'll give the task a meaningful name. This task is going to write a greeting, so I'm going to call it write greeting. Then I'll add a curly bracket to open the section. I'm going to add a curly bracket to close the section now so that I don't forget to do that. I'll return, and then I need to indent. I'm going to use 2 spaces to indent here. You can also use 4 spaces here, but what you cannot do is use tabs to indent, you'll run into problems when you try to upload your method if you use tabs. So do not use tabs. You can use 2 spaces or 4 spaces. You just need to be consistent about what you do. I'm going to use 2 spaces because that's typically what we do in the work repository. Okay. I want this task to take in a name as input. So now I'll specify that by creating an input section in this task. So I'll type input and then space, my open and closed curly brackets, return. And then in this input section, I'm going to again indent 2 spaces. The input that I want to take in is a name in the form of a string. So to do that, first, I will type string to declare that it is a string that I want the workflow to take in. And then I need to assign my string to a variable so I can pass it around in my script. I'm going to call this name underscore for underscore greeting. Okay. That's the only input that I need this to take in. So that's basically it for my input section. Sorry. At this point, if I wanted to do so, I could hard code a name right here. So I could say equals Kaylee. Type my own name. Wow. I could do that. I don't want to do that because I want there to be flexibility in this input. I want to be able to define the input in Terra. So I'm not going to do that. Now, the next section I'll define is my command section. So I'll type command. And then for this, you have 2 options. You could use curly brackets like we have been, but we actually recommend that you use angle brackets instead, 3 angle brackets. So I'll type those to open and close the section, return, and then I'm going to indent 2 spaces. The reason we recommend angle brackets is because it allows you to interpret bash commands more literally within your task. So basically, it'll let you use bash commands in a way that's cleaner and easier. Okay. Now I've opened my command section. Now I need to actually provide the commands I want to use to transform my data. So what I want to do is I'm going to type echo and then hello. And now I want to bring in whatever's defined as the name for greeting variable because I want this to output hello name, right? So to do that, to pull in a variable, you do that by using a tilde and then your curly brackets immediately following. This is going to let you pull in the name of a variable, and you want to put the name of the variable inside these curly brackets. So I'll just type name for greeting inside the brackets. Now I'm going to add, let's see, I'll add an exclamation point. I'll close that there. And then I also want to, so I have my greeting, but I also want to pipe that to an output file, right? So I'm going to type this sideways caret and then greeting.text. So I'm basically telling my task I want it to say hello name, and then I want it to output that to greeting.text in the output file. This should look familiar to working in the terminal for anyone who's done that before, because we're going to be using a Docker that contains bash. Nora asked, are angle brackets or curly brackets better if writing commands in Python or another language? I think if you're using Python, I don't think it matters. But for the pipelines development team, we just recommend across the board to use angle brackets because you're not going to run into problems if you use angle brackets for that command section, whereas you could for if you're using those curly brackets. Is escape character instead of quote necessary in the command? Are you asking if I should have included an escape character? Or are you seeing an escape character that you're asking about specifically? Another question in the chat. So this means tilde curly brackets is a substitute for $sign when using bash. Yes, essentially.
Yeah, but it's communicating a little differently in that, like for bash, you declare a variable using the $sign, and in this case, we're using the curly brackets not as for a bash variable, but to actually call a little variable.
Exactly. Thanks, Liz.
Sorry, I didn't mean escape character. I meant the character below that, the another quote instead of the regular quote.
You're asking about this?
Yes.
You could use double quotes here as well. They just need to be consistent.
Okay. Are those backticks or is it just single quotes? It kind of looks like backticks on the.
You're right, and I think I did type backticks on accident, so don't do that.
That's what I meant.
Yes. Okay, I was confused about what you were asking because I didn't realize that I had done what you shouldn't do. So don't do that. You can use single quotes. You can also use double quotes. Just be consistent. Yeah. Thank you for catching that.
Thank you.
Okay. So we've got our command here.
Is there best practices for how you're naming things? Like do you always, like for a task, do you always kind of do a camel case, like starting with an uppercase letter, or do you just do whatever you feel like?
I think that it doesn't really matter so long as it's something that's meaningful to you and you know something that is descriptive of what it is. As long as you're doing that, it doesn't really matter. And really, if you wanted to, it doesn't have to be something that's descriptive, but that's really the best practice is to make sure to use something that is meaningful to you. Okay, so we have our command section here. Now let's define our task output section. So I'll do that by typing output, space, open and close brackets. I'll return, and then I'll indent 2 spaces here. Now I want the output, of this text file. I want that to be the output of my task. So again, if I don't define this output here, it's going to go away when I exit my container. So if I want to grab this file and I want to use it or keep it and use it later on or something, I need to define it in this output section. So to define it, I'll say file to define the type first. And then I need to give it a variable name again, right? So I'm going to call it greeting underscore output. That's my variable name. Now, there's an output already, an output from the command that I want to be this output, and that's greeting.text. So to set this text file equal to my task output, I can go equals, and then greeting.text. Okay, and that's all I need to do to specify that as my output. The last section I want to write for this task is going to be my runtime section. Again, to do that, I'll type runtime, open and close brackets. Oops. Return and indent 2 spaces. Here, I want to define the Docker that I want this task to use. To do that, I can just type Docker. And now this is the point where you could go to Docker Hub or a different repository and find a Docker that meets your needs, and then use basically everything that comes after the pull command, what the actual Docker is. You can enter that here. For this one, I'm going to use an Ubuntu Docker because I'm using a Linux command for this task. So I'll specify that by saying Ubuntu. And I'm going to pull the latest, as we've talked about previously, and this should be in quotes, as we've talked about yesterday, pulling the latest of anything is not necessarily the best practice. So I would recommend not doing that outside of the confines of this workshop. But for our purposes today, this is sufficient. And that's all I need to do for my task section. So we're not done yet with the WDL script, but at this point, I want to give you all a few minutes to now write your own right greeting task and then raise your hand when you're done with that.
Can I ask another question about this?
Sure.
But in the command line where you specify greeting.text, would it be possible to specify the output variable name there?
I don't believe so, because what I'm telling this to create this file. And so I guess it depends on what you're trying to do, what you want to do with that. If you want to create a file, you're going to want to create the file in the command and then call the file.
So if you just name that as, tilde bracket, greeting output, end bracket.
I think you could do that.
And kept everything else the same, it wouldn't work.
So what you could do if you don't want it to be a file is you could just specify, you could basically like send this, I think you could send this and set it equal to a variable here and then set that variable equal to this variable. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that you could do that, yeah. It's just in this case, we want to create an output file rather than just setting it equal to a variable.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, it's at the play around with it to answer it.
There's a question in the chat. How strict is WDL with regard to spaces? For example, space between keyword and open bracket or Docker and colon, etc. The spaces between things, yeah, like I said, I think the space between brackets and the keyword should still work. I also don't know about the Docker section. Obviously, you need a space between the name of your task and the word task. There are some places where the spaces do need to be there just to specify that there's differences in the words and what's happening. But yeah, I don't know about the Docker either.
We could try it after you have a successful upload. We could go back and delete it and see if it matters.
Yeah.
I have a question about the runtime. I'm trying to put it in the chat box, but maybe I missed it. So let's say if I have a workflow that contains, say, 20 tasks. So, and you mentioned that I could add the CPU, the runtime, stuff like that. But if in the future I know that it will take more runtime, if that means that I need to go through the 20 tasks and change it manually, or we can have something like the config file from Snake makes that we put all this configuration outside and then just change this file.
So you can set it up so that you don't have to specify it in the WDL. You could choose to specify, you could choose to have this be like an input variable.
But now if you put it as an input variable, let's say, again, the same example, if you have like 10 or big number of tasks, then does that mean that I will need to have 10 or 20 input variable for each task?
Well,
No.
no, because if you set up one workflow level variable input for that, whatever you're specifying, you can pass that one workflow input to the tasks that you want to specify that CP or whatever for.
So for the sake of example, and if I'm taking the time to just basic question, if I have task A and task B and we set them to 10 minutes, but in the future I find that task A should be 1 hour, task B should be 1 day, how I will cope up with the situation?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
I have 2 tasks, A and B, and I use the runtime like 10 minutes. Later, I found that task A should be 1 hour and task B should be like 3 hours. So I shall pass it as a parameter or how it works.
Well, so the actual runtime of the task isn't something that you're going to specify. That's going to be dependent on what's being the resources being used. But if you're using that as an example, for say that you wanted to specify the number, you wanted to specify CPUs, or you wanted to specify disk,
Yes.
and you needed to increase disk for one task and not another. So you can use input variables in the workflow to do that, but there are other ways to do it as well. Our pipeline development team, in some cases, I believe, you can basically calculate how much of a particular resource you need and then add a value onto that. So you can set those things dynamically. So there are some ways around it so that you don't have to do it manually. That is beyond the scope of today, but we do have resources that will show you at the end that show you how you can do some of that stuff.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay. There's a question in the chat. What is special about WDL functions that start with caps and the functions that start with lowers? So the only things that are being highlighted that are start with caps are going to be these like type definitions. So like a string, a file. If you had an array, that would be the same kind of thing. The tasks, the inputs, commands, all of these things, these parts of your WDL or parts of your task all start with lowercase letters. So the parts of your task, the sections are lowercase, whereas the types that you're declaring start with uppercase. Hopefully that answered your question. Are single quote and double quote alike? When you try, it seems the variable may not be handled correctly when you use double quotes. I assume you mean here. Yeah, it seems to think that that's a string. So I'm actually not 100% sure if you can do that. It does look a little funky. So I'm not sure, but we can try that as well and see what happens.
What's in the command section is going to be bash. So if it works in, like for this example, because we're using a Docker, that's bash. So that's your restriction on that front. When specifying input and output files, your WDL syntax will be correct if you use a single quote string. However, Terra will be unhappy when you're configuring in the UI if you don't use double quotes. So.
Okay. Seeing a lot of hands. That's great. Okay. How are we doing? Is anyone still working on getting this task written? I'm seeing hands go up. Great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on now. But again, if you need me to slow down, please let me know, and you can put your hands down at this point. So now we have our task, right? What else do we need? Well, we need a workflow definition. So that's what we're going to write now. As I mentioned before, you can put tasks in the same WDL workflow, WDL as the workflow definition, which is what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go to the top of this. And I'm going to start by defining my workflow by typing workflow. And now I need to give my workflow a name. It's a hello world workflow that's taking in a name as input. So I'm going to call it hello input. Okay, and now I can do my open and close curly brackets, return, and then indent 2 spaces once again. Now in my workflow, I need to define an input section. So to do that, let's type input, curly brackets, return, 2 spaces. Okay, so once again, I need to define that it's a string that we're going to be passing to our task, the string that we can pass to our task, right? And so I'm going to type string, and then I'm going to give this string a variable name. I'm going to call it name underscore input. If I wanted to, I could have named this the same thing as this variable here. I could have named it name for greeting. But if you want to use this task in another workflow or for some other purpose, it's good practice to give these things 2 different variable names so that you're able to distinguish them when if you need to go back and update your code or something like that. Okay, now let's define our call section here. So I'm going to type call, and then I'm going to type the name of the task that I want to call, which is write greeting. Curly brackets, return, 2 spaces. Okay. Now, when I call my task, I need to define what the inputs are for that task and how they relate to the workflow level inputs. So this task is expecting an input for name for greeting, right? So we need to assign that here. I can do that by typing input, space, doesn't need 2 spaces, return, 2 spaces. And now I need to put the name of the task variable name for greeting. And I need this to be whatever I decided to call the name of the workflow input that I want to pass to the task, right? So in this case, it's name underscore input. Okay. If I had more inputs that I wanted to define, if I had more inputs that I wanted to define here, I could add a comma. And then return, and then do the same thing, and keep going with that with all the inputs that I have. We only have 1 here, so I don't need to do that. Okay, and now the last section that I need to define is going to be our output section. Because again, we want to write the task output to our workflow output. And in Terra, this is the output that you can actually write to a data table. So I'll type output, curly brackets, return 2 spaces. And now I want to output a file that contains our greeting. So first I need to declare that it's going to be a file, and then assign that to a variable name that I'll call final underscore output. And now I'm going to set this equal to my task output. So that's how I'm going to get the output for my task to be my workflow output. So to do that, I need to first, I first need to use the name of my task. So equals, the name of my task is write greeting, dot, and then the output variable, which is greeting output. So greeting underscore output. And that's how you can, how you will define or use the outputs from your tasks. Okay, so now my output is defined, and that's actually it for my workflow definition. So go ahead and again, take a few minutes to write your own workflow definitions, and then raise your hand when you're done.
Do you mind repeating how do you add more inputs to the input line?
Sure. If you have more inputs in your task that you need to pass a workflow level input to here, you go to the last one, a comma, and then return, and then do the same thing. So if I had input 1 equals input 1, I could do another. You can.
And what about multiple outputs?
You can. So outputs are going to be defined. Oops. Sorry. So if you want to add outputs to your workflow, you can do that by just defining a new, declaring a new output. So if I had a string I wanted to output, I could say string, and then give it a name, give it a variable name, and then whatever I want that to be. So when you're in the task call section and you're adding inputs, you need to use a comma and then go to the next line, right? But if you're in the output section, you don't need to use that comma. You need to define a new output.
I get it. And why does input have a colon and not curly bracket?
So that's just the syntax for the input when you're calling the task, right? So in my task definition, I have input with curly brackets. This is my input section. In my workflow definition, I have an input section with curly brackets, right? But now this is my call task section. This isn't my input section anymore. It's my call section, and here is where you use that colon.
Okay, so that's input for the call section, and the output is for the workflow. Okay, definition. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of hands raised. Are we running into any issues? If you are, please let us know so we can try to help. There's a question in the chat. What is final underscore output? Is it the output file name? No, final underscore output is the variable name for the output. The file name is what I created when I told the task to pipe this greeting to a file called greeting.txt. So greeting.txt is the file name and this file is being saved to greeting underscore output in the task. But final underscore output is the workflow level output that's equal to this output. So this is a variable here. Another question, can WDLs be tested on the local machine before uploading to Terra? Yes, and I will show you later today how you can run WDLs on your local machine. Okay, it looks like most hands are raised, so you can go ahead and put your hands down and we'll continue on here. Again, if you need me to slow down, please do let me know. Okay, so we have our workflow. Now I want to upload this to the Broad Methods repo. I can do that by scrolling down and clicking upload. When I do that, it's going to run a syntax checker in the background, and some people might get errors here, and we can figure out what's going on there, but I'm going to go ahead and do that and show you the next couple of steps here. So again, watch my screen and I'll give you time to do this yourselves. So that worked. I didn't get any errors, so that's great. Now, so my method is uploaded to the Broad Methods repo, but now I want to export it to a workspace. I'll do that by clicking this button, export to workspace here. It's asking if I have a method configuration. I do not have one, so I'm going to choose blank configuration. And then it's going to load my workspaces. And I'm going to choose the one that I made today. So you can actually, in this box right here, you can type. So will puzzles, this looks like the workspace I made today. So I'm going to export it to this workspace, and I'll click export to workspace here. Now it asks if I want to go to the edit page. That's going to be the configuration page for that workflow, and I do. So I'm going to click yes. And then let me just show you this last piece here, and then I'll give you time to do this yourselves. So I'm on my workflow configuration page, and we can set up the workflow to run in 2 different ways, right? We can set it up to run with inputs defined by file paths or with inputs defined by the data table. For this demo today, we're actually going to use file paths because I kind of just want to show you the quick way of doing this. So when you get here, make sure you click this radio button, run workflow with inputs defined by file paths. Okay, you'll know you've done it because this option to select data will go away. Okay, so I have so my workflow is here. I have my input here, name underscore input, and now I want to actually give the workflow a name as input. So under attribute, I'm going to type in double quotes my name, and this does need to be double quotes in Terra. After that, I'll click save. And then I can run my analysis and click launch.
I don't recall us putting any field called attribute. How did attribute get generated?
Right. So what's happening is when you upload a workflow to Terra, Terra is reading the script for you and is creating that JSON configuration file in the background. What that JSON configuration file does is it says, here are the inputs for your workflow, right? So now Terra basically figured out that we have a workflow input variable called name underscore input. So it's pulled that in here for us. So attribute is not something that we add. Attribute is the value that we're setting for that variable, right? So Terra did that work, but now we need to tell Terra what that value should be. And that's just attribute. So this is just basically a label that Terra has given for the value that you're setting equal to that variable.
I get it. I guess wanting to abstract like data sets and things like that outside of this toy example seems a little perplexing.
We will talk more about a real example soon that hopefully will make more sense for you.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's all you need to do. Basically get your workflow exported to Terra and then set it up and launch it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to these slides here. So like I said, you're going to upload your method to the methods repo, export it to your workspace, and then launch that workflow. And once you've done that, go ahead and raise your hand for us and let us know if you run into any issues. There's a question in the chat. If we now edit the workflow, does it automatically change the workflow on this Terra workspace, or do we need to re-export it? That's a great question. With the way that we have brought the workflow into Terra today using the methods repo, I believe you would need to re-export the workflow and then upload it to your workspace. And you would also, of course, need to do that if you uploaded the workflow from a file on your computer. However, tomorrow, we're going to show you how you can integrate your GitHub and your DocStore accounts to be able to automatically pull in changes to a workflow into Terra. All right, looks like there's an error. Unexpected symbol, line 24. Let's go take a look. So I can go and look at my script in Terra here too. Let's see. Expected identifier got equals gradient underscore output. Let's see. So make sure, oh, you found the problem. Okay, great. Did you have an equal sign before the file variable? That was gonna be my guess, but I'm glad you found the problem. Got it. I see. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not a way to type your script directly into Terra. Like Liz said, right now you have to either use DocStore or the broad methods repo for importing your workflow.
Do you have to select data to run it? For some reason, the run analysis isn't coming up for me. It's not highlighting.
So make sure when you get here, make sure you click on this radio button.
Oh, that's the one. Okay, thanks.
That should make that little select data section go away.
Cool, thank you.
Anyone seeing any errors? Y'all doing all right?
I have an error at the input. So within the Terra workflow, it says that I have an error with passing the expression.
Where is the error coming up for you?
So when we go into inputs, there is an exclamatory mark with right over there.
So before the exclamation mark will go away, there's going to be a button around here that says save. Let's make sure you click save. And then hopefully you can get the right analysis.
Great, thank you.
Anyone still working on this? See a lot of hands not raised, so I just want to make sure that people who are following along are able to do this exercise before we continue on.
Mine submitted, but it hasn't completed yet.
That's okay. Once you've launched it, raise your hand for me.
Okay. Why wouldn't it finish in half a second?
So it is obviously a quick task, a quick workflow. But what's happening in Terra when you launch a workflow is that Terra has to commission all of the infrastructure to actually run your Widow because this is in the cloud, right? So it's got to create a VM for your task. So that can take some time sometimes. It should still happen within a few minutes. You should be done in a few minutes.
Cool, that makes sense.
Okay, I see a lot of hands, so I think I'm going to continue on. Again, please let me know if I'm going too fast. You need to hold on a second. Okay. When a workflow, so the next thing I'll show you is where you can find your workflow outputs. And you can go ahead and put your hands down. When a workflow is done running, you can find those outputs in a couple ways. So you can see my workflow is finished. It says done in my job history page. I talked about this a little bit on Monday, right? But if I click on data here, and I go down to the file section of my data page. This is a peek into my Google bucket for this workspace, right? So I can click on submissions, my submission ID. I can click on my task name or my WDL name. Got some UUIDs here, my task, and I come to a place where I can see a file called greeting.txt. If I click on this, it'll give me a little preview of my file, and you can see this is my output. So the workflow worked exactly the way I wanted it to. It output a file called greeting.txt that contains this greeting, hello, Kaylee. So that's where you can find those outputs. You can also, as we talked about Monday, set your workflow up to write to the data table to make it easier for you to find those outputs. Okay. Are there any questions about that? Okay. So now what I'd like to do is move on to the real world example I told you we were going to cover. And this is going to be building off of what we did in our Docker tutorial yesterday. So reminder that what we want to do here is to analyze some sequencing data, right? We want to take in a BAM file, run samtools index and index stats, and then output a text file containing quality control metrics, right? So like I said, we started working on this yesterday where we made a Docker that we can use for this workflow. Just to review what we did yesterday. So this is not any steps you need to take. This is just a review. Yesterday, we created a public repository in Docker Hub, and then we built and pushed a Docker image. For today, you can actually use the Docker that you created yesterday in the runtime section of the WDL we're going to use. So if you were able to do that yesterday to make that Docker, you can use that in the runtime section of this WDL. And then we used samtools index and samtools index stats on our data in the command line, right? But now we're going to do that in a WDL script. So we have a basic WDL template for you, and I'll put the link to this in the chat. There's a link to a basic WDL template. It doesn't have the details filled out. It kind of just has the structure of a WDL there. And so what you need to do now for this exercise is to write a WDL in a text editor. Write this WDL the same way that we just did. But this time, you're going to be taking in a BAM file, calling the commands listed here, and then outputting a file called counts.txt. And then you'll upload it to the Broad methods repo, and then export it to your Terra workspace. After you export the workflow to your WDL puzzles workspace, don't set up your workflow yet. Just get to the point of getting to your workflow configuration page, and then I will walk through configuring that workflow for you. Are there any questions about what I'm asking you to do? No? Okay. So I'm going to give you time to do this now, and raise your hands when you're done, and please let us know what issues you run into. I'm going to turn off my camera for just a second, but I'll be right back. If you need to see, again, the steps for uploading a WDL to the Broad methods repo, or the steps for cloning your WDL puzzles, or exporting, excuse me, to your WDL puzzles workspace, let me know. I'm also posting the link to the public materials in the chat one more time, where you can see the slides if you'd like to look at that.
If we weren't able to get our Docker working yesterday, is there a different Docker that we can use?
Yes. 1 second.
I have the WDL 101 one. Is that the one we decided to keep?
Yeah, I was just about to pull that up.
You can use that Docker in the chat.
Thanks, Liz. Question in the chat: should the workflow start from scratch? For example, creating the directory, downloading the BAM file, etc. No. So what you're doing here is you're writing a WDL that you're going to upload to Terra, right? So you don't need to create a directory. You don't need to download any BAM files because the files that we're going to analyze are actually already in the WDL puzzles workspace. So all you need to do is write this WDL by writing a task that will basically use these commands and output this counts.txt file, and then write a workflow definition that calls this task using whatever input and output variables you decide when you write the workflow. Does that make sense? Great. So you don't need to worry about the infrastructure at this point because we're going to do it in Terra. Is everyone doing okay? Do you need to see something again? Any questions? How can I look at the WDL script for a submission I've already run on Terra? Well, if you haven't made any changes to the workflow since you've run it, one way would be to go to the Workflows tab, click on the card for that workflow, and then click on Script here. So this is going to be your WDL script. I believe there's a way to do it through the job history as well. So you can see that it still has this workflow configuration. So this is the configuration I ran. I could click, and this would take me back here where I can look at script.
You should be able to confirm your snapshot though too.
Yeah. Just in the way.
So you can check your inputs and outputs, as if you saw that on that tab. You can check inputs and outputs from your or actually go into the that is the end. Sorry, I was looking at bigger ones and I was like, where's all the tests? And then if you click on if you click on the submission ID there, that takes you to Google.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's not what. Sorry.
You can go to the job manager. It's going to take me to the same place. I think it's this one. So you can see if you go to your job history, you click on your workflow. It's not your job manager, but this workflow dashboard alpha. If you go here, it'll show you your task calls and stuff here as well. And then if you click on this, it'll show you your full submitted workflow script for that specific workflow submission. So you can go there as well. There are a couple ways to do it. Okay, so just a reminder that for this part, just get to the point of exporting that WDL to your WDL puzzles workspace. you don't need to configure that yet and set it up and launch it. Once you've exported it to your Whittle Puzzles workspace, raise your hand for me. Okay. Got some hands going up. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on and show you how you can configure this workflow and show you a couple other things. But we can come back to this at the end and troubleshoot any issues that people are having, if anyone's having issues still uploading and exporting that Whittle. So go ahead and put your hands down. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to my workspace here. This is the workspace it's in. Sorry about my dog. I'm going to show you how to configure this workflow. So you can just watch me now. And like I said, and we'll come back to this later at the very end, and so you can configure it yourself. So I'm going to open the Whittle 101 BAM workflow configuration page. This is my workflow. It might look a little different than yours. That's totally okay. It depends on what you called your variables, and they could be different from what I called my variables. That's fine as long as we are using the right syntax. The one thing that our Whittle should have in common is that they should all be taking in a single BAM file as input, right? And so my variable is BAM file. To set this up, I'm going to tell Terra to define inputs from the data table this time. So this radio button should be checked this time. I want to select data from the data table. So in step 1, I'll set the root entity type to BAM. It's already set up here. I'll click select data. And now I want to select the smaller of the 2 BAM files. So I'm going to select BAM2 is the small one. Don't use BAM1, it's bigger, it'll take longer. Just use BAM2. Okay, now once my data is selected, pretend this isn't already here. Once my data is selected, I need to tell Terra what column in this data table has the path to my BAM file, right? So to do that, and we talked about this on Monday, I can type this dot, and then I have a column called file_path. That's the column that holds the path to my BAM file, so I'm going to choose that one. Okay, and then I'll check my outputs. This will not already be configured. So when you go to your outputs, so now you need to tell Terra where you want it to write this output if you want it to write back to the data table. I do want it to write back to the data table. So I'm going to create a new column in my data table called this.my_output, and then I'm going to hit save. Okay, so now I'm telling Terra to write this output to the data table, to a column called my_output. I'll click run analysis and launch. And that's how you set up and run the workflow in Terra. I want to review a couple other quick things with you and go through resources and such before we get to the hands-on to you configuring this yourself. So sit tight with me for a few minutes while I show you a couple things, and we'll come right back to this at the end. Does that sound good? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so we will come back to that. Okay, so today we've been iterating in Terra, right, where we're bringing our workflow into Terra and we're trying it out there. When you're actually developing workflows with real data, it's going to be easier for you to iterate locally by installing and setting up Cromwell and WDL. And someone asked a question about this earlier. Okay, so we have instructions for how to do that. So for setting up Cromwell and WDL there. So basically, you'll download the latest Cromwell release using that link along with WDL. They come together. And you also need to have the correct Java version, which is Java 11. So you need to install that if you don't already have it. You may need to change your Java home in your batch profile or whatever shell you're using to match your installation location. And here's an example of what that might look like here. You can also try out the Cromwell 5-minute introduction to start learning about Cromwell if you'd like. Okay, once you get Cromwell and WDL downloaded to your local machine, you can try out running a Whittle and using WDL to generate a JSON file. So I just want to demo that for you quickly today. So I'm going to open a terminal window and just blow it up here before I share it. And I will share this part of my screen with you. So you should see a terminal window now. And I've already installed Cromwell and WDL. Oops. I can check by doing which Cromwell, and I installed it using Homebrew, so it kind of gets installed to an interesting path, but I need to know this path. So this is where Cromwell is located for me. And then WDL is located in the same directory. You can see based on the directory structure that I have downloaded version 85 of both Cromwell and WDL, and they do need to be the same versions, and they come together, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay. So what I want to show you is that if you have a Whittle you want to run, like the one we just made, you'll need to make a JSON file that goes along with it if you want to run that Whittle locally. We've been working in Terra so far, which makes that JSON file for you, but you need to do it yourself to run locally, right? So I just want to show you how to do that for the Whittle that we've been working with. So let me go to the place where I have that set up, which is here. And if I head this Whittle file, you can see workflow samtools.exstat. So you can see this is my version of the workflow that we've been working with. Now, to make a JSON to go along with this, you'll use the tool called WDL. To do that, you want to use the command java-jar, and then you need to specify the location of your WDL jar file. Mine is located here. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here. You could install Cromwell and WDL into the same directory as the files that you want to analyze to make it easier for yourself. So you could just type WDL.jar instead of a full file path if it's in the same directory. Mine's not, so I'm typing a path here. Okay, now I want to use the inputs option to tell it which Whittle I want to create inputs for, and that's going to be the Whittle 101 BAM Whittle. I want to pipe that to a JSON file using the caret, and then I have to give it a name. I often will name JSON files the same name as the Whittle. That's pretty common practice, but for this, I'm going to call it example.json. Okay, so this is my full command to create my JSON file, and there we go. Now, if I do head example.json, you will see that it's created for me a JSON formatted file where file is declared here. So this is where I actually need to give the file a path to the input so that I can run the Whittle. I've already done that in another example, so I'll show you what that looks like. Whittle 101 BAM JSON. You can see I've given it the name of the BAM file I want to use. I haven't put a path here only because this file is in the same directory, is in the directory that I'm in and where I'm going to run this from, so I don't need to put a path. I can just put the file. And once you have your JSON created and filled out, you can actually run your Whittle using Cromwell. You can do that with java-jar and then the location to your Cromwell jar, which again for me is going to be this, but for you it will be different. It depends on your installation location of your Cromwell. Sorry about that. Then I want to type run and then the name of the Whittle I want to run. So Whittle 101 BAM Whittle. Use the I flag to specify my input JSON file, and then I put in the name of my input JSON file, which is Whittle 101 BAM.json. And I can hit enter, and now Cromwell is executing my Whittle for me, right? So that's what's happening now. It's running. You'll get a succeeded message in this terminal window once it's done, but you can also go into the folder with your executions and find your submissions and see your outputs. So I want to share with you what that looks like.
May I ask, in the workflow definition, there was no task. So what is actually checking for?
In the workflow tab, you're asking about this WDL 101 band WDL?
Right.
And
So-
what are you asking about the task?
So there was no task definition, right?
Oh,
So,
I see. So when I pulled up, when I was looking at the workflow, I wasn't looking at the full file. Head doesn't show you the whole file.
okay, I didn't pick on that. Okay, got it. Okay,
Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, share my Finder with you. So this is the folder that I'm in where I just executed, where I am executing this WDL. So just like in Terra, it's going to create submission folders for you. If I click on Chronological Executions, so you can see I have multiple submissions here of this workflow. So if I click on, so this is from today, continue down here. Is this correct? No. Let's look at execution. And here we go. My output file is called idxstats.txt. And so if I open that up, you can see, hopefully you can see that part of my screen. You can see this idxstats.txt file that's my output for this workflow that I just ran. So it's similar to running on Terra, but it's going to be easier to iterate this way while you develop WDLs, and then you can just upload them to DocStore or the Broad Methods repo once you kind of have a good idea of what your workflow needs to look like. Okay, back to slides. Okay, so that's that. A couple of things as you're testing WDLs locally, or as you're testing WDLs as you start writing them. I'm going to go through these quick, so we don't have a lot of time left. But basically, these are just some suggestions for you as you're doing that. So basically, start small with your testing, test locally. Make sure you pay attention to the difference between when you're running locally and then you run in the cloud. Locally, you have file systems and directories, right? But in the cloud, you're going to have links and URLs to files, things like that. And then we have a bunch of resources for you on this slide. I'm going to try to go through them quick here. WDL is maintained by the Open WDL community, so you can go to that GitHub, and there's a lot of good resources for finding things WDL related there. There's a WDL 101 spec, 1.0 spec, excuse me. It's like the source of truth for what you can do in WDL if you're using Cromwell, which is what Terra uses. That's what we use today. We have some documentation that we recently updated that will walk you through basic syntax and other things that we've shown you today. But it also has some really good cookbook documents on it that will show you how to do specific things in WDL. So I definitely recommend checking those out. All of those things are things that users like you who are learning WDL asked for documentation on, so we made that documentation. There's a Learn WDL repo that's super helpful. So here, this was developed by Lynn Langit, and basically you can go into this repo and see examples of real working WDL scripts that will walk you through different use cases. So if you're interested in doing a specific thing in WDL, you can check there and see if she already has a WDL that does that. There's an open WDL Slack channel where you can post issues to the community. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but this is all kinds of WDL users. So it's not just people who are using WDL with Terra, it's people using WDL outside of Terra as well. So it's a great place to ask questions about WDL. I'd always recommend that you look at full-length level pipelines. We have a bunch of them in Warp that, of course, I would recommend. If you see any pipelines there that you're familiar with or are interested in, do take a look at those. They might provide some inspiration for you. I do also just want to show you on this website quickly. We have a WDL best practices section. So this was developed in part with our pipeline development team. And so these are the things that they're thinking about when they're developing pipelines in Warp. So things like cost optimization, auto-sizing disk, which I think someone asked about that earlier, setting default values, reusing code. So those are going to be good resources for you, good things to think about. Theogen Genomics has a WDL workshop that you can try out. I hear it's really good. And then you can also find example pipelines and tasks in BioWDL. So there's a lot of resources, but hopefully some of them will help you get started writing WDLs. And I also just wanted to point you to some resources for managing cloud costs if you're not familiar with it. We have some Terra documentation as well as a video, and we also have linked the Google Compute price list. So this is going to be information about different types of VMs. So remember, when you're setting up workflows, you're commissioning a VM in the background. And so this is going to tell you about the pricing for those VMs. Okay, so now we have our survey. So before we talk more about workflow configurations for anyone who wants to stay, please take a minute to fill out our survey. It's really helpful for us to continue to make these workshops better, and I'll post a link to that in the chat. There's a survey link for you. And then just a reminder that tomorrow is going to be our DocStore GitHub integration module. So David from the DocStore team is going to be here again with us to talk about DocStore and how you can link your DocStore and GitHub accounts to automatically pull your workflows into Terra. And finally, here's the email address for those of us in the data science platform with the workshops. You can contact us with any of the questions that you have here. I think that's it. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please fill out that survey. And if anyone wants to try configuring that workflow themselves that you uploaded to your Terra workspace, I moved past it, didn't I? Here are the step-by-step instructions for that. Don't feel the need to stay if you have to go or would like to go. But if anyone is interested in trying it out right now, you're welcome to do so. Anyone else, feel free to leave. And thank you for joining us.
I posted this in the chat that I found a problem when I configured and ran my WDL, and I'm trying to figure out now how to edit it in free run, but I'm having trouble versioning and snapshots, and I can't make it work between the Mathews repository and Terra. Can you talk us through that?
Okay, so you have, let's see, I'm sorry, Zoom is in my way. So you've gotten to the point of getting your workflow in Terra.
Yeah, I ran it and it failed, and I found the error. I didn't pull my Docker version, I did the right tag on my Docker.
Okay.
So I need to fix that.
Okay. So what you can do is if I go back to,
you had it right, Kaylee. You should be able to just click source there.
Right, yeah, click source here. Yes. So if you, under your workflow configuration, click on source. That's right here. So this is your workflow, right? Click on that, and it'll take you back to your methods repo. And you should be able to go into here.
Just for the summary tab there? Yeah. Just edit.
Oh, it's right here. Edit. Yes. You can do that like this.
Perfect.
And so you're going to save it as a new snapshot. And then once you do that, you should be able to come into Terra and click snapshot here, and then click the new snapshot.
You'll have to refresh the page.
Yeah.
Before you
Right.
see the new
It's showing up now. That makes sense. Thank you so much. It's way easier than what I was trying to do.
Sorry, I have a question maybe not related. Like the last part I missed it, I was playing with the Terra to upload my WDL and make it work. So is the record will be available soon because I missed the last part when he was working on terminal.
Yeah, that's okay. None of that is going to be, we're not going to build on any of that part for tomorrow. So you don't need to watch it right away, but it will be available, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I actually had the same question, sort of. Was there, like, is the using the Cromwell redundant with running on Terra, or does this give you separate outputs?
So this is two different ways that you can run your workflows, right? So what we suggest doing is if you're in the beginning stages of writing a workflow for the cloud, writing a WDL workflow, is to do it locally. So you want to install Cromwell, Java, make sure you have all of that stuff set up, and you can run WDL locally using Cromwell installed on your local machine, right? But Terra, running on Terra is totally separate. It's another option for running WDLs. It's going to be a good way for you to keep track of your WDLs, a good way for you to share WDLs with collaborators. If you have a collaborator who needs to analyze a piece of data in using, say that you're working with someone, they add some data to a workspace or to a data set, and you want to analyze that the same way as the rest of them. Well, if you've already done that part in a workflow that's in Terra, you can really easily go back to that workflow and run it on the new data. So it's separate, right? It's creating separate outputs. It's using, both are using Cromwell in the back end, but we showed you how to use Cromwell because that's what Terra uses. So that's for simplicity here. There are other ways to do it locally, but Cromwell's a good one to use.
I see. So we can basically test our WDL before putting it on Terra and like wasting sort of compute resources.
Exactly, yes.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording here, unless anyone is still trying to configure their workflow or has other questions. Okay, question in the chat. Running Cromwell locally also have the privileges of running samples in parallel, just like Terra. Yes, you can do that. It's just about the way that you set up your WDL, basically. But WDL, the workflow language, allows you to run samples in parallel, so you'll be able to do that. Yes, thanks, Liz.